Thank you, Mary, for cutting to the chase and laying out the most important dilemmas facing this particular population, which is, as you say, a huge part of our society and our future. So thank you very much for that. It is now time for us to open it up for a full conversation and discussion and questions. So I open up the floor. Jeff. And then.
Oops. That was a wonderful presentation, Mary. Thank you very much. I wonder whether it would be possible and interesting to compare the terms of assistance across different countries regarding immigrants or undocumented people and so forth. All of our societies are stressed right now, but the kinds of restrictions that the U.S. put on seem to me to have a very deep history with a very long British and American tradition of exclusion. It almost sounds like the poor laws of 1604 or 1834. There was always in British poor law tradition an incredible concern: we will not help you if you don't belong here. And so registration, local membership in a parish and so forth were strictly defined terms, and the purpose of these laws was always semi-punitive, either semi or fully punitive. So it just seems to me there's a lot of revelation about culture in this, and it would be nice to know if there are comparisons with what other countries did and whether that reflects different patterns and different cultural responses.
Yeah, so maybe some of our European colleagues can help with what happened here during the pandemic, because I don't know enough about that. But you're right, the public charge law is actually from the 19th century and is one of the first exclusions that we ever had for immigrants, was the idea that they might become a public charge. And it has been selectively enforced throughout our history. It was used during the Depression to repatriate a lot of Mexican Americans, many of them US citizens. They were just put on trains and sent back to Mexico. So the public charge rule is baked into our immigration history, and it's been on the books. Trump weaponized it against immigrants just during his administration, but it does have deep roots in our history.
Yes, thank you. I have a question for both Mary and Pearl. Let me start from what just said by Jeff. It's very relevant. I think I totally agree. And in fact, to provide just an hint, we have to go back to the Greek-Roman civilization. The basic idea of the Greek civilization was polis, which we translate from which political, etc. The key concept of the Roman civilization was civitas. What is the difference? That the polis model is an excluding model. Unless you were born in Athens or in Greece, you have been considered foreigners. And only mercy could try to help the foreigner. But the civitas model was the opposite. You see, provided that you accepted the laws of the Roman Republic or Roman Empire, you became immediately Roman. At all effect, how many emperors were not born in Rome? They were born in Africa, Northern Africa. That is something that people forgot. Now, it seems to me that we have, in a sense, to go back to that, because the Anglo-Saxon world, they followed the Greek model. That is the point. And now I have no time to provide the evidence, all the literature on that, but that is what we have. Now, to this regard, let me mention an example of what you said in the end of your very important presentation. I live in Bologna. Bologna is a city. Now, last month, the Bologna Council, the municipality, passed a sort of not a law, because it's a local level, whereby they introduced what they call virtual citizenship. Now, in Italy, we do not have a law, because the opposition of few right-wing political parties does not prevent our parliament. So what the Bologna municipality did was the following, that the children of immigrants, they are, from the point of view of the local administration, equalized to the natives in terms of access to schools, access to health services, etc. If you look at the figures in this pandemic, are completely different from those of Bologna, which means, why do I say so? Because this is something that can be done by every city. Even though our parliament do not reach an agreement, but why do not try the so-called bottom-up approach? And that was possible because the civil society in Bologna reacted already a couple of years ago, and that was the result. Of course, some people, they said we would not agree, but that agreement was passed, that it's really important. Now, if I may, I can also raise a question for Pearl. Now, Pearl, you made a wonderful presentation, but I don't know whether or not you realize that what you said introduces a sort of pragmatic contradiction, not logical, but pragmatic. Because what you are saying is that, and I very much like your approach, the fact is that when the children which are brought up according to your model, which, as you know, you can teach us, is the Ubuntu model, which is a typical word of the African native languages, they enter, when they reach the adult age, enter the market economy setup, they get into trouble. Because you see, the market economy is based on efficiency. On the other hand, the Ubuntu approach is based on effectiveness and on relational goods. So what you described, stressing the lack of relationality, etc., the fact that you said when you are sick, you are psychologically isolated. So you do not need, it's not enough to provide you with medicine. Medicine are important, but they are not all. Because if you are desperate or if you feel lonely, that is not enough. So perhaps you should consider, Pearl, that we, in one way or another, we have to cope with this aspect. Finally, you mentioned the model of the African family. As you know very well, next month, this academy will have a plenary session specifically dedicated to the family as a natural, a social institution. And one of the topics is exactly the plurality of family models. And since I take it for granted that you will participate as a member of this academy, perhaps you might develop even further your argument to indicate how we can conceive a sort of a convergence between different models of family. Because after all, children are brought up initially within the families. So thank you very much again, Pearl, for your presentation.
Pearl, would you like to respond?
Yes, thank you. Thank you very much for the comments. They will certainly enrich the analysis and the conceptualization of this. The issue of the contradiction, I mustn't be misunderstood to be saying that Africans want nothing to do with the imported medicine. In fact, in South Africa, we are halfway through vaccinating the population under very difficult situations of persuasion and some degree being forced through mandates in various institutions. But there are people, and we've lived a life of duality in terms of practice in many areas of South Africa, in the sense that populations have embraced change that is also acculturation to some extent. They also know that they have dilemmas that are unique to themselves. If you talk about Ubuntu and how it creates a form of empathy and socialization that says that we are all in it together. But at the same time, if I mentioned the middle class, I'm not mentioning it in an uncomplicated way, because many people know how it is to evolve to be middle class as a person with your nuclear family, but still be responsible for the extended family. And this is where the concept of black tax comes from in South Africa, where certain people and their nuclear families have graduated, if I may put it that way, into middle class status, but they are responsible for so many things to do with the extended family. So it's a very interesting contradiction, pragmatic contradiction at a personal level, that which you wonder, how are we able to sift and exclude in the considerations of intervention? Because we all know that people are confronted with a broad range of poverty-related issues, secular migration between the urban and the rural area in pursuit of the economy, and all sorts of complications. And so I think I really welcome the idea of nurturing this idea and elucidating how politics and policies and regulation has complicated the family, in addition to the various types that family is, but how it has been complicated by politics. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Melissa?
Thanks. And thank you for these amazing presentations. I really appreciate them. Mary, you mentioned policies that exclude certain classes of children. And the US and many other countries in the world seem to be expert at categorizing certain categories of human beings that are worth less than others. These same COVID-related restrictions have been applied to people in the sex trade, explicitly, economically against women in strip club prostitution, online prostitution, sugar daddy dating websites. If a woman was discovered in the US to be receiving money from the sex trade, she was denied any emergency assistance and the child benefit payment. Japan also did this, and both countries have been denounced by human rights lawyers for doing that. The Netherlands, on the other hand, issued an emergency stipend to everybody in the country monthly, and it lasted for quite a while. I think it's been stopped now, but it lasted for a long time. And what was interesting to me as a sex trade researcher is that women in the sex trade in the Netherlands use that stipend to get out of prostitution, to get out of harm's way. And I'm sure that's also true of, or would have been true of, immigrants' families who were offered this kind of economic protection, emergency protection. So thanks for that. And I also wanted to ask you a question. You know, the 24-hour news cycle. I am unaware, and it crosses my mind late at night when I'm laying in bed, where are these children who are separated from their parents? What has happened to them? I'm not hearing anything about them. It's like the horror stories ended, and then Nothing. Can you tell us anything about those kids?
Yes. Thank you, Melissa. The Biden administration has been slowly trying to find the parents of the children who were taken away by the Trump administration, and have tracked down the majority of them. But there still are some who are in foster care in the U.S. who have not, they still have not found the parents because they didn't keep any records to be able to reunite them. I'm not sure what the actual number is right now, but even in the pandemic, there are over 100,000 unaccompanied minors who have come to the border. And those are the only people who have not been forced to, well, for a while, Trump was even forcing the unaccompanied minors to stay in Mexico. The Biden administration has kept this horrible policy of keeping families in Mexico, but they have allowed the unaccompanied minors to come in. And they are being a little bit better about letting them reunite with relatives who are in the US, which is what most of these kids want to do. They come with the name of an aunt or an uncle or a parent, but of course, the Trump administration had stopped them.
Thank you so much for 3 extraordinary presentations. I think the first homework we all had when the pandemic began was to reread Albert Camus' The Plague. And I think the metaphor that Camus articulated in that in that book is that the pandemic made us all refugees. I think that's such a profound insight. So 3 separate reflections. First, paraphrasing the great Abba Eban, the enemies of immigration never miss an opportunity to miss an opportunity. And the historical pattern that you outline is so on point. The Jewish disease was TB. The French disease was syphilis. This grotesque, vulgar kung flu. In the history of immigration to the United States, the paradigm of legality, which is the fundamental Cartesian binary that structures the imaginary on how we think about immigration, is legal, unauthorized. This is new, Mary, you know this. The early prototype, because the idea of visas, this is all very new. The original framework was a medicalized framework. In Ellis Island, they didn't have attorneys. In Ellis Island, they didn't have folk looking at. Ellis Island was a medicalized. We took the crew of MSNBC to spend a couple of days in Ellis Island with Lawrence O'Donnell, and the doctors would look for 3 things. What is this, glaucoma? Very contagious, the disease? They were looking for that. They were looking for TB, and they were looking for the people walking up the stairs. So you come into Ellis Island, and you have to walk up. And they were medical judgments. They were not the kinds of bureaucratic judgments that we see today. So this is very, very old. So that's a reflection and a thank you. And thank you also for pointing out the cruelty. This is government by cruelty that purposefully and surgically design issues to hurt categories of vulnerable persons. What I see as a common theme in the three reflections is, of course, they capture entire universes. Kiran, my dear friend, India is a universe. It's a world. Africa is a universe. Could you like the matter of immigration? Mary, I think 3 of the 4 Nobel Prize winners for the United States in the sciences were immigrants. It's the best of times for immigrants. A lot of them are poor people escaping horrific. So I wonder if you could talk a little bit about these internal differences that you see, Kiran, in India, Pearl, in Africa, and Mary in the world of immigrants. I think, and Ashish will help me here, but I think 2 of the vaccines were developed either by immigrants or by the children of immigrants in the United States. So thank you for just the beauty and the eloquence of your presentations.
Let's start with Kiran, please.
She had to leave.
Right.
Yes, she's not in the room.
Okay, all right. Well then, Pearl, please, could you join us and comment?
Okay. I think that it is interesting to talk about internal differences in a country in Southern Africa, but more so in a country like South Africa. In the paper, I spent some time explaining what an African family is, merely because of the harmonious conflict, if I may put it that way, that we live with in South Africa. Eventually, in this wrestle with what an African family is, I end up speaking about geography and speaking about loyalty and people self-defining along those terms, because there is no way that one can capture very easily the differences in Africa and the links with the outside of the continent that those differences self-generate without necessarily walking into a turmoil of conflict conceptually, especially if you're going to try to define it yourself and not involve the units that you are defining, which is what I tried by saying self-defining via geography and loyalty. Because the white families, the Indian families, the African families, and a whole range of people that are seen as immigrants and foreigners in South Africa, all find space in this definition of the African family. They also sit in a relationship that makes them look towards each other. If we are talking about their relationship with the resources, and in this particular paper, I was trying to establish a link between knowledge as a resource. Yesterday, I think it might have been Sarah who really took us through something that she called pedagogies of belonging. In South Africa, the pedagogies of epistemology, or rather the epistemology of belonging, if I may put it that way, is really complicated. It is at the core of people excluding each other in the resources of knowledge and feeling more amenable with the fact that they have generated the knowledge more than others inside the country. Before we even talk about the fact that some of them hold important positions with regards to vetoing what comes and is acceptable and what can be promoted via use of labs and all the sorts of resources that we have. It's complicated when you even begin to talk about patents and the relationship between our universities and the machines and all of the things, the resources that are serviced from Japan and from other countries. Actually, you begin to see how bare we are and how we sort of like propound the Western machinery of the African being operated on. But I think that what I'm really hurrying to, as I wrap up, trying to illustrate here is this idea of how vaccination being stifled by conspiracy theories is actually quite shallow as an explanation, because it's much, much more complicated when you do not involve the people concerned in terms of understanding what their issues are. Thank you.
Thank you so very much. Mary, did you want to say or comment back? And then Ashish I know you have a question. Yes? Okay, Ashish.
So Mary, I ask you a question that I just wonder if you can reflect on. And I'm playing maybe pop sociologist here, so I'm hoping that a real sociologist will set me straight on this. It has struck me, and certainly watching the pandemic, but before the pandemic even, this notion of solidarity, social solidarity, seems to be at some tension with immigration. And that as immigration rises, that solidarity gets weaker. So first of all, is that true, or am I just doing a very superficial analysis? Because I'd love to understand that better. And then how do you think that that played out in the pandemic? Because so much of a response to a common disease requires social solidarity, this faith in government. There's some really nice analysis published a couple of weeks ago in The Lancet that looked at national responses to the pandemic. And the biggest predictor of success was trust in government, but actually more importantly, trust in each other. And if that trust in each other is affected by immigration, then that poses, for those of us who believe deeply in immigration, I'm an immigrant, it poses some important challenges for us to overcome. So I wondered if you could reflect on that.
Yes, so there's a lot of research that looks at whether or not immigration erodes the commitment in societies to one another and to redistributive policies, and there's some evidence that it does undermine it. On the other hand, if you look throughout the history of the U.S. and many other immigrant receiving societies, we've done quite a good job of creating this idea of citizenship as being very inclusive, right? And I think historically and currently, we're still actually quite good at absorbing immigrants. My own sense is that, from the research, is that the recipe for a decline in social trust and for a lack of solidarity is a rapid rise in immigration. And we've had that for the last many decades now. And it's a bit of a race between the kind of fear that a rapid rise in immigration causes and the sense of inclusiveness that the everyday interaction with immigrants causes. So both of those things are happening simultaneously, and places like the South and the Midwest that had not much immigration and then had very rapid rises were the places where there was the most awful anti-immigrant sentiments. Places like New York and Boston and cosmopolitan cities that had been a long history of immigration and where people mix a lot, that actually doesn't happen. And then there is the match to the flame, which is the politicians that manipulate the fear that people have and I don't think we should think about this without thinking about rising inequality in the society. So there's a reason to redirect people's attention to immigration as the cause for their problems, rather than the rising inequality, which is the real cause for their problems. So I actually think that we could go either way in terms of rebuilding social trust, but yes, the ways in which it's manipulated to take people's fears either of losing their job or of getting sick and having an easy answer to it is quite worrying.
Thank you very much. I actually have a question to Pearl, actually. So I think you really lay an important dilemma to us around the vaccine skepticism within the South African context. We hear all the time about vaccine skepticism in the US, for example, which is very tied to education and political party affiliation. And you bring the notion of middle-class centeredness and the need to have conversations with folks on the ground, really, about the reasons. I wonder if you had the ear, or perhaps you do have the ear, of people who are actually trying to roll out vaccines in an effective way. What would be your direct advice at this moment, please?
I think, let me put it this way. The head of World Health Organization had a visit recently to South Africa to see the new hub for vaccine generation, which is a good step because in the actual creation of a vaccine hub in the country, I think it's a good step that the country realized it had to do something to assure the population in the first instance that it is generating things from the soil. Of course, there are other conversations about how the actual patents, the intellectual property of it is just being supplanted into the country, but it's a good gesture. But one of the things that he mentioned in the engagement, and I think he had been briefed about the kinds of challenges that we have regarding hesitation towards vaccines, is that he then pointed out that there has been a huge delay in involving social science expertise in the whole global engagement and seeking of interventions towards the pandemic. And the whole approach has been biomedical and related to the sciences, and the sciences sort of assuming that we know that this is fine and therefore you should accept it as the solution. And it was amazing just to hear that acknowledgement. I mean, it was amazing to all of us, actually, because in here, there seems to have been generation of other identities, the anti-vaxxers and the vaxxers, the anti-mandates and the pro-mandates, and all sorts of things that have now almost, if you do this kind of thing in a country that has recently been so polarized, you almost create a science race kind of ladder, which is what we are experiencing right now. So what a useful public health approach would be is to understand the context to its most localized level, because there are issues around men and women in terms of their relationship with sickness. And to some extent, to say that people need to be counseled around needles is true, but not true for everyone. There's always been trends in South Africa of noticing that men had to be much more, there had to be much more of a campaign towards them, even during the times of HIV and AIDS around circumcision. It wouldn't happen in the Eastern Cape where circumcision is a culture, but it would happen in KZN where circumcision is an option. So to a most localized level, we needed to have deployed a social science intelligence to understand how to craft the message towards a particular community. But there are complicating things at a country level, such as what I was hinting about how the whole idea of giving people certificates to enter a particular place resurrects the issues that were happening to minors when they were stripped naked and scrutinized and then given papers. There was also, and people are asking these things on a daily basis, we needed to explain how we arrived at vaccines so quickly. Because South Africa, having been so infected by HIV and AIDS, lived through a situation where scientists would go away and come back and tell people, it will take 10 years for a cure, for anything to come up. So they got used to the idea that it's not urgent. And they are suspicious when everyone is dying, all of a sudden there is a solution. It needed to be explained how over time the medicine progression is such that it was possible to do this, so that in fact they do not end up believing the conspiracy theories. It's complicated, but it's doable. Thank you.
Thank you so very much, Pearl. Thank you so much, Kiran, and thank you, Mary, for your wonderful presentations. We learned so much. We are now going to take a break for half an hour, and then we will return at 11:15. Thank you.